chosen ones, something has shifted within you. What once worked on you no longer does. The guilt trips, the emotional bait, the false urgency, the sweet lies wrapped in concern. None of it lands the same anymore. And they feel it. This is not arrogance. This is awareness. There was a time when you over-explained your intentions, doubted your instincts, and gave people the benefit of the doubt, even when your soul was warning you. But Stoic wisdom teaches a quiet truth. The moment you master yourself, manipulation loses its oxygen. You have learned to pause, to observe, to separate emotion from reason. And in that pause, power was born. Manipulators thrive on reaction. They depend on chaos, insecurity, and your need for approval. But now, your calm unsettles them. Your silence confuses them. Your boundaries, once negotiable, are now immovable. You are no longer easily provoked, no longer easily rushed, no longer easily deceived. This is the evolution of a chosen one. Not louder, not harder, but wiser. You no longer fight every battle because you finally understand that self-control is the highest form of dominance. Today, we uncover the signs that prove you are no longer easy to manipulate, and why Stoic wisdom has made you untouchable. Stay with me. This message is not for everyone. It's for those who have awakened. Now pay attention. You stopped explaining yourself. There was a time when you believed clarity could save you. You explained your intentions, defended your choices, and carefully arranged your words so no one would misunderstand you. You thought that if people truly knew your heart, they would treat it with respect. But life taught you a harsher truth. Those committed to manipulating you were never confused. They were strategic. Manipulation thrives on explanation. Every justification you offered became a thread they could pull. Every emotional disclosure became leverage. The more you spoke, the more they studied you, not to understand but to control. Stoic wisdom recognized this centuries ago. What is truly yours does not require a defense, so you stopped, not out of bitterness, not out of pride, but out of awakening. You learned that silence is not weakness, it is discernment. You realized that explaining yourself to those who twist your words only hands them a map to your inner world, and once you saw that pattern, you withdrew your access. Not everyone deserves the backstage pass to your reasoning, your pain, or your process. This is where your power shifted. When you stopped justifying your no, manipulators panicked. When you stopped narrating your decisions, they lost their influence. Your calm unsettled them, because calm cannot be argued with. Silence left them facing themselves, and they hated that mirror. Stoics taught that peace comes from living in alignment with reason, not from winning approval. You no longer seek to be understood by those who benefit from misunderstanding you. You let people think what they want because you finally understand something deeper. Their opinion is outside your control, but your response is not. Now, you speak with intention, not compulsion. You choose clarity where it's earned, not demanded. And in that restraint, you became untouchable. The moment you stopped explaining yourself, you reclaimed your time, your energy, and your inner authority. You no longer argue for your worth. You embody it, and that, more than any explanation ever could, is what set you free. Emotional triggers no longer control you. There was a time when certain words could hijack your entire nervous system. A tone shift, a subtle insult, a dose of guilt disguised as concern, praise laced with expectation. And suddenly, you were reacting, defending, overgiving, shrinking, or proving yourself without even realizing what had happened. They knew which buttons to press because you had handed them the controls. But something changed. You began to notice the pattern before it completed itself. The moment of discomfort. The familiar emotional surge. And instead of obeying it, you paused. That pause became sacred ground, the space where freedom lives. Stoic wisdom teaches that events themselves are powerless. It is our judgments about them that disturb us. Once you understood this, emotional manipulation lost its force. Guilt no longer rushed you into compliance. Fear no longer dictated your choices. Praise no longer softened your boundaries. You stopped mistaking emotional intensity for truth. This is not emotional suppression, it is emotional literacy. You still feel deeply, but you no longer surrender control of your behavior to your feelings. You observe emotions like weather passing through the mind. You allow them, but you don't let them drive. And that distinction is everything. Manipulators depend on immediacy. They need you to react before you reflect. The moment you learn to delay your response, you disrupted the entire dynamic. Calm became your armor. Composure became your language. Silence became your signal that you are no longer available for emotional games. Now, when they provoke you, they find no spectacle. When they guilt you, they meet discernment. When they flatter you, they encounter self-respect. Your stillness frustrates them because they can no longer predict you, and unpredictability is terrifying to those who seek control. Mastery of emotion is not about becoming cold. It is about becoming sovereign. When you choose your response instead of surrendering it, you reclaim ownership of your inner world. And once you rule there, no one else ever will. That is the quiet power they can feel, but can no longer touch. You recognize patterns, not promises. There was a time when words carried weight simply because they were spoken with confidence. Apologies soothed you. Promises reassured you. Explanations felt like progress. You believed that intention mattered more than follow-through, and you gave people endless chances based on what they said they would do. But experience refined your vision. You began to notice the gap, the space between language and behavior. You saw how easily words could be arranged to calm you, delay accountability, or secure another opportunity. And slowly, almost quietly, you stopped listening for reassurance and started observing for evidence. Stoic wisdom teaches that truth is revealed through action, not declaration. A person's behavior, repeated over time, is the most honest confession they will ever make. Once you understood this, promises lost their hypnotic effect. Now, you don't get swept up by grand speeches or emotional apologies. You watch what changes after the conversation ends. You notice consistency when no one is watching. You track effort, reliability, and follow-through, not once, but repeatedly. One good moment no longer erases a long pattern of neglect. This shift made you dangerous to manipulators. They rely on hope. They survive on second chances fueled by eloquent regret. But once you recognize patterns, hope becomes grounded in reality. You no longer confuse potential with character. You no longer fall in love with words that aren't supported by behavior. You've learned that excuses explain nothing when results remain the same. You've learned that sincerity without consistency is just performance. And you've learned that silence followed by change speaks louder than endless explanations ever could. This is not cynicism. It is clarity. You don't assume the worst, but you also don't ignore the obvious. You give people room to show you who they are, and you believe them the first time their actions become a pattern. When words and behavior don't align, you choose behavior. That single decision has saved you time, energy, and emotional exhaustion. It has protected your peace more than confrontation ever did, because behavior never lies, even when the mouth does. You're comfortable being misunderstood. There was a time when being misunderstood felt unbearable. You rushed to clarify, softened your truth, and adjusted your tone just to keep the peace. Rejection felt like a threat, and approval felt like safety. You believed that if people truly understood your intentions, they would stay, agree, or treat you fairly. But wisdom arrived with a harder lesson. Not everyone misunderstands you by accident. Some people choose misunderstanding because it serves them. It allows them to distort your boundaries, rewrite your motives, and avoid accountability. And once you saw this, you stopped exhausting yourself trying to correct every false perception. Stoic wisdom teaches that truth does not require applause. The calm mind does not chase consensus, and the disciplined soul does not beg to be liked. You began to understand that being misunderstood is often the price of being honest, especially in a world that rewards comfort over clarity. Now, when people project narratives onto you, you let them. You no longer scramble to manage impressions or over-explain your character. You trust that those who truly see you will recognize you without persuasion, and those who don't, they were never meant to have access to you anyway. This comfort with being misunderstood unsettles manipulators. They rely on your fear of rejection to bend you. They expect you to fold under misrepresentation, but your stillness disrupts their strategy. When you don't defend yourself, they lose their leverage. When you don't correct every lie, they lose control of the story. You've learned that solitude is less painful than self-betrayal, that being alone in your truth is far more peaceful than being surrounded by people who require you to be smaller, quieter, or less authentic. This is not emotional detachment. It is emotional maturity. You choose alignment over approval, integrity over popularity, inner peace over external validation. And in doing so, you've gained something rare: freedom from the opinions of those who do not carry your values. A calm mind does not beg for approval. It stands, unshaken, whether applauded or not. That is the quiet strength they never expected you to claim. Your boundaries are quiet, but unbreakable. There was a time when you explained your boundaries as if they were negotiable. You announced them loudly, hoping clarity would earn respect. You justified them, softened them, and sometimes apologized for having them at all. And still they were tested, because anything that needs constant explanation is assumed to be flexible. Stoic wisdom taught you a different way. True boundaries are not speeches, they are decisions. You learned that strength does not shout warnings, it enforces consequences. So you stopped announcing what you would no longer tolerate and began acting accordingly. No drama, no threats, just consistency. This quiet firmness changed everything. When someone crossed a line, you didn't argue, you adjusted access. When respect was absent, you withdrew your presence. When patterns repeated, you didn't lecture, you stepped back, and in that silence your boundaries became unmistakable. Manipulators struggle with this version of you. They depend on debate, emotional chaos, and second chances extracted through pressure. But your calm enforcement leaves no room for negotiation. There is nothing to twist, nothing to provoke, nothing to push against. Stoics understood that the strongest walls are not built with noise, but with resolve. A boundary only works when it is lived, not announced. And yours are lived daily, through what you allow, what you decline, and where you invest your energy. You no longer seek permission to protect your peace. You don't explain why something feels wrong. You trust your judgment enough to act without consensus. And that trust in yourself is what makes your boundaries unbreakable. This is not rigidity. It is self-respect refined by wisdom. Your limits are clear not because you speak them loudly, but because you honor them consistently. People now learn how to treat you not by what you say, but by what you tolerate, and what you quietly remove yourself from. Strength doesn't shout, it stands firm, and that stillness is louder than any argument ever was. You detach from outcomes. You can't control. There was a time when uncertainty kept you trapped. You tried to manage reactions, anticipate outcomes, and steer situations so they wouldn't fall apart. You believed that if you cared enough, explained enough, or sacrificed enough, you could influence how things ended. And manipulators sensed this. They used your attachment to outcomes as leverage, dangling approval, withholding clarity, or threatening loss. Stoic wisdom exposed the flaw in that struggle. You learned that control is an illusion when applied to other people, their feelings, or their choices. The only domain that truly belongs to you is your response. Once you grasped this distinction, something profound shifted. You released what was never yours to manage. Detachment did not make you careless, it made you precise. You stopped over-investing in results you couldn't command. You focused on your effort, your integrity, and your values, then let the rest unfold without gripping it tightly. When outcomes no longer defined your worth, fear lost its power over you. This is where manipulation collapses. When someone can no longer threaten you with abandonment, disappointment, or disapproval, their influence evaporates. When you accept that some things will unfold beyond your will, you become unshakable. You no longer chase closure. You no longer beg for certainty. You move forward without guarantees, and that terrifies those who once controlled you through anxiety. Stoics taught that attachment is the root of disturbance. Detachment, then, is not indifference. It is freedom from emotional hostage-taking. You still care deeply, but you no longer cling. You act with intention, then release the need to control how it is received. Now, when situations don't resolve the way you hoped, you don't collapse. You adjust. When people choose differently than you expected, you don't chase. You accept and redirect your energy. This quiet acceptance makes you untouchable, because nothing external holds your peace hostage anymore. You've reclaimed ownership of your inner world, and in doing so, you've removed the final handle anyone could use to control you. Detachment didn't harden you, it liberated you. And freedom, once claimed, cannot be taken back. You see, praise as a test, not a reward. There was a time when praise felt like relief. A compliment reassured you that you were doing enough, being enough, and moving in the right direction. Approval softened your vigilance. Flattery lowered your guard. And manipulators understood this well. They knew that admiration could become a leash when it replaced self-trust. Stoic wisdom shattered that illusion. You learned that praise, when excessive or strategic, is rarely innocent. It often arrives with invisible expectations attached, a compliment that precedes a request, admiration that quietly demands compliance, validation offered not to honor you, but to influence you. So you began to listen differently. You no longer absorb praise automatically. You pause. You weigh it against reality. You ask, internally, does this align with my actions, my values, and the truth of the moment? If it does, you accept it calmly, without swelling or shrinking. If it doesn't, you let it pass without resistance. This discernment makes you difficult to control. Manipulators rely on emotional inflation. They want praise to inflate your ego so it becomes easier to steer. But your sense of worth no longer rises or falls with applause. You are grounded in something deeper, self-evaluation. Stoics warned that dependence on praise is a quiet form of slavery. The more you need it, the more power you hand away. Once you stopped feeding on external validation, flattery lost its grip. Compliments no longer distracted you from red flags. Admiration no longer brought access to your boundaries. You now see praise as information, not affirmation, as data, not identity. You remain humble when recognized and steady when ignored. Neither applause nor silence alters your course. This doesn't make you cold, it makes you sovereign. You still appreciate genuine acknowledgement, but you are no longer shaped by it. You move according to principle, not popularity. And that consistency unsettles those who once controlled you through approval. Praise has become a test, and you pass it by remaining unchanged. That is the discipline of a mind no longer chained by admiration. You see, praise as a test, not a reward. There was a time when praise felt like relief. A compliment reassured you that you were doing enough, being enough, and moving in the right direction. Approval softened your vigilance. Flattery lowered your guard. And manipulators understood this well. They knew that admiration could become a leash when it replaced self-trust. Stoic wisdom shattered that illusion. You learned that praise, when excessive or strategic, is rarely innocent. It often arrives with invisible expectations attached, a compliment that precedes a request, admiration that quietly demands compliance, validation offered not to honor you, but to influence you. So you began to listen differently. You no longer absorb praise automatically. You pause. You weigh it against reality. You ask, internally, does this align with my actions, my values, and the truth of the moment? If it does, you accept it calmly, without swelling or shrinking. If it doesn't, you let it pass without resistance. This discernment makes you difficult to control. Manipulators rely on emotional inflation. They want praise to inflate your ego so it becomes easier to steer. But your sense of worth no longer rises or falls with applause. You are grounded in something deeper, self-evaluation. Stoics warned that dependence on praise is a quiet form of slavery. The more you need it, the more power you hand away. Once you stopped feeding on external validation, flattery lost its grip. Compliments no longer distracted you from red flags. Admiration no longer brought access to your boundaries. You now see praise as information, not affirmation, as data, not identity. You remain humble when recognized and steady when ignored. Neither applause nor silence alters your course. This doesn't make you cold, it makes you sovereign. You still appreciate genuine acknowledgement, but you are no longer shaped by it. You move according to principle, not popularity. And that consistency unsettles those who once controlled you through approval. Praise has become a test, and you pass it by remaining unchanged. That is the discipline of a mind no longer chained by admiration.